DeFi 3.0 and the future of innovation. My name is Matt Leising. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of DeCential Media, where we focus on the stories of the people who are building Web3 and blockchain. I spent 17 years at Bloomberg News before that, where I started covering crypto in 2015. So I wanted to just run down and we're going to do a quick introduction to everybody and then get going.
Yeah, GM everyone. My name is Rahul. I'm co-founder of Connext protocol, which is a cross-chain interoperability protocol.
I'm Tegan Kline. I'm the co-founder of Edge and Node. We're the initial team behind the graph, and I also lead business at Edge and Node.
Hi, my name is Katie Talati. I am the head of research at Arca. We're a crypto asset management firm, and I oversee all the investment research into our funds.
All right, great. I thought to kind of set the context here, we could go and talk about, everyone could give an example of a current DeFi protocol or app that you like, that works. And so we can just sort of set the stage there and then talk about the future.
Yeah, this one's kind of hard because there's so many cool protocols. It's really hard to choose one. But for the purposes of this talk about like the future and where I think things are headed, I'm going to say Frax Finance, just because I really like the way that they've like both vertically and horizontally integrated themselves to really like look like a player that has the most liquidity to do kind of like the most interesting different things with their liquidity and eventually get to the point where they can attract and onboard some of these bigger institutions and players.
Cool. I really like Rubicon Finance. I think what's interesting right now is kind of getting away from AMMs and moving towards order books. And I think that the transition to layer 2s have really enabled that order book movement.
I'm going to say Uniswap just because they were really like the pioneer in the field of pretty much every DeFi primitive. They were the starting point. And since just releasing an initial AMM, they've clearly built on the technology. They've made pools more efficient. So liquidity has gotten better. And they're also looking to the future, like, hey, if we're going to be an AMM, that's cool, but we're going to also try to build beyond that, and allowing projects to also use our smart contracts to build their own interfaces in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about this earlier when I was watching an AMM presentation, and it occurred to me, in the wake of FTX and a lot of other centralized failures, I think AMMs need to get better, and I think there's a long way to go there. But do you think that that's happening, or you mentioned more like order book trading? Is the future, like a decentralized, automated market-making system, do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely both will win, right? AMMs are super efficient. You can make a lot of money as an LP with the pools. But I think, when you trade on a centralized exchange, what do you look for? You look for limit orders, and that's really what you're going to get with the order books. So I think that the UX and the UI can really improve, and we're starting to see it improve over time. And to your point, Matt, with the FTX, the wake of FTX, we've learned an important lesson, which is not your keys, not your crypto. I think we relearn this over and over again, and as new people come into the space, it's really important that they understand that you need to self-custody.
Yeah, I think one thing on that note too, I think it's really interesting because AMMs are like one of the initial DeFi primitives, right? It's so beautiful, really. It's like you just trade against a smart contract. It gives you a formula. And it works really well for certain use cases like long tail assets and low volume. But once you get into these bigger volumes and more efficiency needed, then AMMs don't scale. And now we have the tooling with layer 2s and some of these other really cool infrastructure pieces to actually make viable order book exchanges.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not the first person to say it, but all the failures last year were centralized entities, and the things left standing like Uniswap and other AMMs are decentralized, and I think that shows the power. What are the other lessons that we should be taking from last year and a lot of the failures and the frauds, and as we think about DeFi and the future?
I think, yeah.
I think the biggest thing is just transparency, right? I think with any of the DeFi projects, for the most part, their treasuries are on chain. You can see activity on chain. You have a real idea of what's going on. Versus with centralized exchanges, at the end of the day, it's a black box. We do get reports of hey, these are what Coinbase's volumes are, but there's no way that we're necessarily proving that. We also don't know about their solvency or their creditworthiness. But you might more about a DeFi protocol because they're usually publishing their treasury balance. And if you look at any of the big projects like MakerDAO, MakerDAO, like Wi-Fi, any of those, they're like every month or quarter, they're usually putting out a report with their P&L.
On top of transparency, I'll say, of course, self-custody, which we mentioned, but also censorship resistance. I think, the Bitcoiners really got this right. They cared about censorship resistance from day one. With Ethereum, we were a little bit more optimistic. We thought regulators were just going to do the right thing. And I think we're starting to see that that's not always the case. And what we build in this space, it needs to be censorship resistant. And you mentioned Maker. What happened recently with Wormhole, with Maker, Oasis rolled back the transaction and got jumped back the crypto from that attack. So that is not censorship resistance. So I think it's really important, and it's something we need to focus more on.
Yeah, and I think what you guys are kind of saying in the end is decentralization matters. Like, we're building this world of decentralized finance. We're not here to rebuild these financial rails of the old system where we can have these actors that just come in and do whatever they want behind the scenes and end up like blowing up themselves and blowing up the users in the end. It just becomes like a worse version of the traditional finance system because it's not properly regulated anyways.
Yeah, I would add security to that. I think people need to take security seriously and take it first. It's not, that should be the first thing you're concerned with. And with that in mind, I'm just wondering, play devil's advocate, I guess, are we ready for DeFi? Is this ecosystem ready to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think people are getting burned left and right. People are losing money. But at the same time, we are seeing these like battle-tested protocols forge themselves through the fire. Like Uniswap right now, anybody can trust that with like any amount of money, and you're never going to get wrecked. Aave, Compound, some of these like really blue chip protocols are the ones that have shown that they are ready. And I think, it just takes time to get to that point, takes a lot of experimentation. People are going to lose money along the way, which really sucks. And I don't know if there's like, better ways to kind of test this stuff out beforehand, but it really seems like test and prod is the name of the game. But I think, at the end of the day, you do end up getting these protocols that become battle tested through this process.
Totally, yeah. And I will say, we're more ready today than we were during DeFi summer when gas fees were super high. Now we have layer 2s, we're scaling, we've reduced costs. But to your point, you always need to audit your code time and time again. The white hat hackers in this space are so great. But yeah, as a founder, it's really important to audit before you send it into the wild.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I disagree with the test and prod, I guess, vibe that everybody in the space has. I think it was great when we were new and we were just trying to push ahead and say, hey, look what all of this can do. And you just pushed it live. People were, jumping into pools and stuff like that. But if you really are talking about what brings the next million, billion people into crypto, into DeFi, you can't have them losing money in a rug pull or in a smart contract failure or a faulty oracle or a governance attack. That's just not going to be widely acceptable. The reason that the corporates that have not come into the space, big corporations, they are on the same page. They don't think security is there yet. They would want to trust their customers' funds to these protocols. So I think that security testing is a huge thing that we need for this next iteration.
I'll also add to your point earlier, just decentralization is so crucial, and there are pieces of these DeFi applications that are not yet fully decentralized, and there are many applications on the Graph's decentralized network, like SushiSwap, that have decentralized their open API layer. So those applications can live forever.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not advocating for testing and prod at all. I don't think that's a good thing that we should be doing. Yeah. But at the same time, I've built protocols. I know how hard it is to test every single thing before, and inevitably something gets found out in prod. And it's just about reducing that surface area as much as possible, and then also building on top of these foundational primitives that we have built that have been battle tested. Like right now, I would build on Uniswap because I'm comfortable with that, and I know the risk there. But I wouldn't build on some random new DEX or something like that just came out and is not audited or anything.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think the bigger issue is not that the teams need to be doing a better job of testing their code. We need more tools so they can better test their code. That's at least for us, that's what we're looking for.
But that's the beautiful thing about smart contracts, right? Is we almost have self-regulation because it's all public and everyone is constantly battle testing the code. And just like with regulations, how people circumvent the regulations and then they have to patch up those regulations, the smart contract does that itself. So it's almost like self-regulatory in that sense.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, that's like such a adversarial environment, right? Like any hack that can happen will happen. So like, once you've gone through this sort of like layer of being live and being online, then you kind of like know at a certain point that like nothing else can really happen, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it comes as a shock to developers coming into this from traditional software development that all of your code is going to be online and you can see it. And I think that's something that a lot of devs need to deal with and get used to. So we've talked about some of the impediments. Another one is our friend Gary Gensler at the SEC. If, as he says, everything but Bitcoin is a security, to me, my first reaction is like, that kills DeFi.
It kills it in the US. It doesn't kill it overseas.
Okay, but do we want it to be killed in the U.S. or
We
what can
don't.
we?
But if we want to have a this regulatory regime that wants to push innovation out of the country, it's going to go out of the country. It's already started to.
Is there anything that the community can do about that, or is it just something that we're beholden to him to opine on?
I think pushing this like decentralized censorship resistance, it's like if you push this stuff in and just put it out there, you kind of make it so like people can use it. Anybody can use it if it's just out there. Yeah, you might have to like tornado cache and VPN yourself or whatever, but like people can still use this stuff if it's out there. And hopefully eventually maybe when like a new regime comes in, they will see that, be like, this stuff is out there, this stuff is used, we've already pushed out all the US developers and teams out, so like how do we focus on bringing that back? And maybe that's just something that is inevitably gonna happen in the way things are going.
Yeah, I've been covering the SEC for a long time, and whether it's the SEC or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, they always try to expand their remit. So this doesn't shock me that Gensler's doing this, but I really think Congress needs to get involved and kind of lay down some new rules. So let's talk about, people talk about, okay, we're in a bear market. That's when people build. Let's get some alpha here. And what are you guys hearing? Are you getting any kind of early signs of where the next DeFi innovation might be coming from?
I think there's a lot of room when it comes to options trading. I think perps have found product market fit with AMMs, with order books, but I'm really excited to see what comes out in kind of on the operation side or the option side. But also, you can always use more perps as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes out.
Yeah, I guess two things. One thing definitely is actual, either off-chain order books, but projects that act or look much more like centralized exchanges. Whether it's just like an interface interacting with Uniswap or 1inch or other, liquidity protocols, bringing that in. And then kind of on a more like infrastructure level is, in general, like the biggest issue I think we faced during the last cycle was a liquidity crunch. At the end of the day, if like you're an institution and you're trying to like trade around in crypto, it's very capital inefficient. Like we have no true prime brokerage. And so whatever that looks like, I do know a couple projects that are working on kind of more like infrastructure, aggregating liquidity and stuff across different places for people trading. And I think that's like kind of the next step. Because at the end of the day, people need credit, people need to be able to take out leverage. And when I say leverage, I do not mean 100x, perps on Binance. I mean like, 2-3x normal leverage amount to make sure that you have assets in one place and it's going to cover you if you're trading in another.
Yeah, one thing I'm personally excited about, especially walking around and seeing everything here, is like all the focus on zero knowledge stuff, like, especially for the scaling layer, like ZK EVM, ZK rollups, but then also this extra privacy layer, which, gets back to the point that you're bringing about like US and all these regulations, right? Once things get really private, yeah, of course it's going to piss off the US, but at a certain point they can't really do anything about it anymore.
And how are you seeing things? You're in Dubai. How are things in the Middle East in this area and like innovation-wise?
Yeah, in terms of Dubai, I live in Dubai, by the way, but it's kind of like a different atmosphere compared to the US because it's almost like you don't feel like the government is actively working to like push back on you and really like shut you down. Like they have kind of embraced it more openly. Of course, there's still regulations. They're trying to always be involved at every step of the way, but at least it's something like they're trying to attract the talent. They're trying to sort of take advantage and step in where like the US is pushing back. They realize that and they see the opportunity, so they're being more open and they know that that is going to end up attracting talent towards that area.
So where do we stand on token design? Is a token the way to go, or do you think it's too much in the regulators' crosshairs at this point? Is there an innovation that's coming that could make it more palatable, or how does that work now?
I think that utility tokens are a new asset class. You can't kind of put them into commodities or currencies or securities. And I think that it's really important to thoughtfully design your token economics. Within the graph, we spent about 2 years designing our token economics before we ever put engineering resources behind the network. And that's what's really powerful about Web3 and crypto is we're thinking about the incentive structures before we are finding product market fit. And that's kind of the opposite of what the Web 2 did, right? They found product market fit, and then they're like, oh shoot, how do we make money from this? And that's why it's become a very extractive place.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I think in general, the space has a lot of products, doesn't necessarily have a business. And I think that's, so if you are thinking of building something, we always want to talk about like, who's going to use this? Who's going to need it? Can it make money?
Yeah, to some extent that's true, but I'll say there is another layer, which is the public good infrastructure side. Like stuff like the Graph is building, and we're also building at Connext. It's like we're building to be public good infrastructure. We're building to be a protocol that is around forever, censorship resistant, like completely decentralized. So in order to do that properly, you need the right kind of token, you need the right kind of governance, you need to think about all that stuff. You need to incentivize the actors in your protocol in a way that the protocol can live forever, long past like any of us are here.
Totally, and also like public good doesn't mean people aren't making money and getting paid. The thing about crypto and these public goods is you can contribute and you get compensated commensurate to the value that you're bringing to these protocols. So in the graph, you can earn as an indexer if you're serving queries. You can earn as a delegator if you're giving GRT to indexers to serve queries. So there's a lot of ways to participate and to earn in these protocols.
So the thing about DeFi that we got to keep in mind is that it has revolutionized a lot of how we interact with finance. It started with the ICO boom, where now you had a brand new way of raising capital, which is a huge function of the traditional financial world. Then we got into DeFi Summer, where there was lending and collateralized, interest
Yield farming.
Payments, and that's another huge reason that banks exist. You mentioned options. What are some other, just spitballing, but what are other financial areas you think that are ripe for a new sort of peer-to-peer approach to how the traditional markets work?
Yeah, one thing I'm really bullish on is identity solutions. Like, it's not really financial, but I think, Polygon is going the right direction with their Polygon ID thing, and they're taking privacy seriously during that identity piece. So, like, you don't just dox yourself every time you show your ID. You basically prove that you are the owner of some part of that identity, and then it keeps yourself secure. And I think that's, like, revolutionary and could, like, change the way that any of our identity systems work in the real world.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely on that train with you. And even just like if we actually had a real identity solution within crypto, it would solve so many of the issues that I think are blocking us from like the widespread adoption. But yeah, I mean, just the idea of even having privacy when you interact with like a smart contract, like they know you're KYC'd, they know you're not a bad actor, but they also don't get all that information on you, like my home address.
And I would add to that, I think real world assets that are going to get tokenized and traded digitally, I think is something that I keep hearing more and more about. I know like at Arca, you have a treasury fund, right, where you're tokenizing treasuries and then you get paid the yield through that coin. Is that something that you think we're going to see more of?
I mean, definitely. We're already seeing a bunch of projects that are kind of trying to work in that direction. You've got like Ondo Finance. They're issuing tokens backed by treasury bonds. There's also, I believe Frax is trying to open an account with the Federal Reserve so they can directly buy treasuries and trade them on chain. So there's a lot of other projects too, like working in the real world asset space. There's Centrifuge, Credix, Goldfinch. The whole idea here is like you're trying to figure out a way to bring what is in this $1 trillion market over here in traditional finance, and how do we bring it on chain? Or how do we off-chain get access to that market?
Yeah, I'm really waiting for the day where I could kind of put my house into a vault and borrow against it, or like, tokenize it, split it up, sell half of it, something like that. I think there's a lot of really cool things you could do. And one really interesting real-world asset that I recently learned about is small business merchant loans. So like, you could have basically KYC'd borrowers, but then you can have anyone in the world like lending to this pool, and then you have a certain like list of borrowers who meets a certain risk criteria actually borrow from that pool.
So we've talked about ways to grow this market and for when people come back in after the winter's over. What do you think the focus should be retail folks here, or should it be institutional, larger money asset managers?
I mean, crypto is a bottoms-up movement, and what's exciting is the regulators are actually allowing individuals to get in ahead of the institutions, which I think is really powerful, and I think we should try to onboard as many people from around the world on the retail side before the institutions catch up with this industry.
I'm half and half. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the institutional dollars represent way more than the retail, and it's a numbers game. Like, would you rather go after 1 million people who each have $100, or would you rather go after 10 people that have $10 million each? So if we're just talking about growing the asset class, growing the infrastructure, and growing this, asset class in this ecosystem, I think going after kind of like the big whales as like a top-down approach is maybe something we need to consider after we've kind of gotten the more grassroots part of crypto going.
Yeah, I think, what we've seen is like liquidity rules everything, right? You need liquidity, big liquidity, deep liquidity for any of these protocols to work. So I think, to your point, we do need to onboard these institutions to get that kind of liquidity. But at the same time, we need to make this fair and accessible to everyone. So we need to make retail always have the option to get in no matter what. No matter if they don't have a bank account, if they're located anywhere in the world, they should be able to access like this open and free financial system.
So what are some of the impediments there to bringing in new folks, like institutional investors? What needs to change before the Goldman Sachses and the BlackRocks of the world are comfortable, funding an automated market-making pool?
So the big one is KYC, and I know a lot of people like kind of see that as a bad word in this space, but basically KYC or AML is there's a law called the Bank Secrecy Act here in the United States, and basically it requires any financial institution, if you're doing business with somebody, to know who they are so you can trace their funds and make sure they aren't a terrorist and that they're funding, terrorism overseas, or they're funding any other kind of like any type of business or group that is on the OFAC list. Now, the problem is that institutions, if they go against those KYC AML laws, they get fined in a huge way. And in some cases, they can lose their licenses for banking, for brokerages. And so they have to take those regulations very seriously. The number one complaint I hear from institutions were like, oh yeah, like we can't do that because we have no idea we don't know where the money in this liquidity pool came from. We have no idea who we're borrowing against. So back to the point of centralized identity, if we all had wallets that had KYC'd us, even though they were anonymized, interacting with these DeFi protocols, that's what institutions need. They need to know that they are not, breaking any of the existing laws, basically.
I'm okay with institutions being the last to join this ecosystem, but I'll say like the number one limiting factor is on the regulatory side. And, the regulators are, they're part of the problem as to why FTX was able to grow as big as they did, because there was so much demand for these products. No one in the US was allowed to do it. So FTX did it overseas, and then everyone lost their money. So I think that, regulations are a big blocker when it comes to institutions.
So one of my friends actually gave me an interesting take today around like the institutional onboarding, around the fact that like institutions are afraid of the non-reversibility of the blockchain itself. And because of that, they're extremely afraid to like put in a lot of dollars, especially into immature protocols that might suffer exploits or something. But then I was thinking, I don't necessarily agree with that. And I'm very much a public blockchain maxi, like, high security, finality. But the cool thing about this public blockchain is you could even build like a custodial layer on top that like escrows all funds for like 7 days or something before it goes on chain. So I think that's interesting talk.
I'll also add, I used to be in investment banking, and the tech stack inside of banks, it's atrocious. It is so bad. Everything always breaks. It's supposed to be T+2. It ends up being a lot longer because something breaks downstream. And so these banks are ripe for this tech innovation. And over time, eventually they will adopt DeFi internally, but they're going to fight it as much as possible because it impacts their margins.
Well, it was interesting what you said about the non-reversibility of the blockchain, and I also think part of that comes from like the user experience level too. Like mistakes get made entering like private key, public key. It needs to be a lot more seamless, but that comes from kind of like the app layer and any infrastructure layer that's coming on top of these primitives that we've created.
Yeah, exactly. I use my credit card for everything because I know I can just reverse the charge if anything gets messed up, right? So we almost need that in DeFi too.
It's also worth noting, I learned this just last week, Broadridge Financial Group, they've been running crypto or repo trades, repurchase agreement trades on chain, and they're doing more than $1 trillion in real volume per month. JP Morgan has another similar system where Goldman Sachs is working with them. They're doing billions of dollars a day in real trades. So, the banks are starting to come in here where they see it to their advantage, and it saves them a lot of costs, and it's like you said, the tech stack is a nightmare. So I guess I wanted to ask, another thing we've been writing about at DeCential recently and is getting a lot of attention is central bank digital currencies, and is that DeFi, or should we be worried about that, or what's your guys' take on CBDCs?
Yeah, CBDCs are the surveillance state, right? That's not DeFi. That goes against everything that DeFi believes in, and cash, you have cash, and it's illegal not to take cash, right? You have the right to have privacy when it comes to cash, and adopting CBDCs will be total invasion and surveillance of all of your financial data.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of my tokens in my wallet being able to be shut down or pulled from me at any time, or anybody looking in and the government seeing exactly what I'm transacting anywhere.
I agree with you guys. And I guess the good news for us is that they're so afraid of the irreversibility that we aren't going to get a CBDC for a long time, at least here in the States.
So is something like US dollar coin, is that an acceptable alternative, or should the government partner with a private firm to administer that from the Treasury or something like that, so that there's maybe a layer in between so that the government can't see what I'm buying every day?
Honestly, at least in the States, we're a country that's pretty big on our privacy laws. If you look at any of the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court even recently, you can see that the right to privacy in the States, though, is something that I think if you do create a CBDC and you're putting it out there, it should come with a very strict set of regulations about the surveillancing of U.S. citizens. And I think that's honestly the best way to do it. You're not going to get that somewhere like China.
The central banks need to create the mess that they created with fiat, and I think that Bitcoin is giving them a run for their money by giving them competition to actually make change. And the wealth income inequality gap is 100% the fault of the Federal Reserve, of the central banks. The US dollar has declined by 98% since the creation of the central banks. So fix the mess you created, and Bitcoin wouldn't be where it is today if they didn't create that mess for us.
Okay, just to wrap up, I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit. DeFi summer, of course, happened a couple of years ago. We're now in another bear market. When are we going to get out of this winter, and what's your prediction on kind of the new thing that grabs everyone's attention?
Just look around. This is insane. This event has been growing every single year, no matter what, bull, bear. So we can just see, it's just a flywheel right now of just unstoppable energy that is just keep going on and on and on. As much as I pay attention to prices, I don't really care because I'm going to keep building no matter what. And I know eventually one day we will disrupt everything. We will get through all this. And like you said, all the institutional banks will run this stuff in their back ends. And once we get to that point, it's just to the moon.
Yeah, and to that point, ETH Denver, I've never seen so many side events, layer 2 scaling, zero knowledge proofs, data availability layer. The network effects are insane. And, like you said, we're in a bear market, but bear markets are the best time for building, and the market's kind of irrelevant. And it's kind of nice as a founder to be able to just stay heads down and build through this without 9 million distractions during a bull market.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. very broadly on the market, I do think that we are kind of past the worst of it, at least for this cycle. I think, unfortunately, looking forward, crypto has become very a bit more mainstream to the point where macro and kind of like the broader financial landscape is impacting our asset class. So that's why it's hard to kind of predict like when will the next cycle start. For me, it's when do we see that next innovation that really brings in new users, that really spreads crypto to like the next billion people.
I think 6 to 12 months we'll be out of it.
All right, cool. So it's really about you guys, the D-Gens. You're keeping it going. So thank you, and thanks for coming to this talk. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Cheers, you guys.
Thank you.